Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast from the Manchester Evening News. I'm Tyrone Marshall, sitting in the hosting chair today. I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst, just as I was on the South Coast on Saturday for a trip to Brighton, what was an incredibly long day for myself, doing it on the train. Samuel, you drove. It's a nice club, Brighton. I think we both enjoy going there, but it's not one for 12:30 on a Saturday, is it?
No, and the walk from the Bridge Car Park, which is normally quite pleasant. You're going past, I think, a cricket green, some other fields there. It was just raining relentlessly, so it was. Yeah, normally United are always at Brighton. It feels like in August or May, and the weather's almost always pretty good. But Saturday was very very much exception, and sod's law. I think it started to brighten up after the game had actually ended.
Yeah, it did. Like I say, I got the train home, and it was a long, convoluted journey, but it was gradually getting sunnier as we departed Brighton and looking very nice. So, typical of the way things go. It might have been sunny, but for those United players looking out the plane window, it would have looked dark and cloudy. A miserable end to the game, really. I mean, it was one I think we both found pretty difficult to sum up. It felt certainly first half like you were seeing signs of improvement again, even though they were 1-0 down at half time. The best compliment you could pay them when we kind of talking about time was that it was boring. When last year it was incredibly chaotic, and United were, they were appointment viewing last year, but not for United fans, for neutrals who didn't quite know what to expect. Where it felt like there was more control, and then that kind of vanished in the second half. It felt like the winning goal had been coming. I mean, a few days on, what are we on, 2-3 days on? How do you reflect on it now?
It was really difficult to write just because it was another bloody added time goal that they conceded, which completely changed the complexion on it. Even if they'd drawn that game, I think you'd have seen it as a relatively creditable point that they were 1-0 down, and they should have gone 2-1 up. I think Joshua Zirkzee in the future will think twice about sliding for a ball when it's actually gone past him. That's why I don't think it was a completely luckless incident there. It was a bit daft of him as well to be doing that. But how often does that happen? That first half we went back into the press room and were quite borderline effusive about how United played. Their approach play was good. They were quite slick at times. They created a great chance for Ahmad at 0-0, but it was just, of course, undone by that, by the goal from Danny Welbeck, and both goals they conceded, the defending was really pretty poor. When they did equalise, Brighton, that was very much against the run of play. Brighton were on top. The first 50 minutes of the second half, I mean, Brighton had obviously the one that was cleared off the line, and Welbeck hit the bar again. And that was a concern that United came back out for the second half, having played quite well in the first half, and they actually got worse. And then out of nothing, it almost felt like Ahmad was sprung away and he got his goal. And of course, Ten Hag had made that enforced change with Xerxes coming on. But as positive as United were in parts, there's a reason why there's been a lot of negative coverage. One, they lost. Two, the manner of the defeat. They've lost, I think, is it 6 or 7 times now under Ten Hag to goals scored in the 90th minute or beyond. They only ever lost 8 times to 90th minute goals or added time goals under Sir Alex Ferguson, who was there for 26 and a half years. Ten Hag has not been there for 2.5 years. And if you wanted to have a really glass half empty outlook on it, you would say that the attackers can't score. There's nothing in the midfield beyond Kobbie Mainoo, who's looked pretty weary, and the defenders can't manage games out. So they have got issues in with the defence, the midfield, and the attack. And it's fine to say there were good signs to take from it, and to an extent in all 3 games this month they have played well. They've played well in chunks, but we said about that in the final preseason tour game against Liverpool in South Carolina. They played well in chunks, but they got beaten 3-0. And it's no good going throughout an entire season, coming away from United games and saying they played quite well today, but they didn't win, because they're not going to get anywhere doing that. And there were some elementary issues with the squad. They do not have a proven and dependable goal scorer. They spent more than £100 million on 2 strikers, and neither of them have got a proven goal scoring record. So that is an issue, and maybe it will come in time, and it needs to come sooner rather than later if United have a successful season. But at least they are creating chances. And I think just doing a rough count of it, I think there've probably been 9 good to great chances they've had in the 3 games this month, which they haven't converted. But you don't qualify for the Champions League through some expected goals table or something like that, because apparently United are second in that. And in terms of the game management, the manager was a problem there, unfortunately. I didn't get taking Fernandes off for McTominay. I understood why McTominay would come on. I thought it was pretty staggering that both midfielders stayed on for the full game when they were both clearly struggling to different extents. Maguire's removal didn't seem enforced, and it's an unwritten rule that you don't disrupt your back four unless it's an enforced change. And I think that probably contributed to the lack of organisation right at the death. And also, it feels quite minor, but when Fernandes came off, the captain's armband went to Casemiro, who speaks limited English. So again, that's bound to have a bearing on the lack of organisation towards the end. I have absolutely no idea why Anthony even came on. Just, I think the only impact he made was to concede a cynical foul. So Ten Hag said afterwards, if you can't win the game, make sure you don't lose it. But his substitutions gave the impression that it was win or bust, and in the end, it was bust. So United's, I think I was told afterwards, United's plane leaving for Manchester was delayed by 2 hours, and I suppose you could say so far this season, their season is yet to take flight.
Yeah, yes, very good, very good. Yeah, I mean, the defensive sub is interesting. Like you say, you don't tend to make subs like that, swapping one centre half for another, even with 11 minutes to go so late in the game. It seemed a bit pointless. And like you said, there's been no mention of Maguire. I did think, I mean, this is going back a bit now, but the subs, the 2 defensive subs he made with 9 minutes to go against Fulham when he took Mazraoui and Maguire off for De Ligt and Johnny Evans.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, I remember, I mean, I didn't do that game. I remember watching it on telly and thinking, that 2 subs changed the entire back four because everyone moved a position.
Yeah.
I think, Martinez went to left back, Dalot would have gone to right back, Evans and De Ligt were then the centre halves. And I thought that feels a bit of a risk with 9 minutes to go. And obviously it didn't matter against Fulham. It did kind of cost them here. I mean, let's start with the goals, because that is ultimately what's cost United. It felt a bit chaotic towards the end, and that was obviously a big problem for last year. But generally, there's more control in the game. Ten Hag said they need to settle for a point towards the end. I think that's probably fair. It was too open, and it felt like it was Brighton that were doing the pushing. But is it just too simplistic to blame these goals on individual mistakes? I mean, yes, Maguire should clear the cross for the first goal, but there was no pressure on the ball throughout that build-up play, really. And then the second, I mean, Ten Hag has highlighted the failure to stop the cross, which I think is fair enough. There's 3 players close to him, but there's 7 outfield players in that penalty area for United, and they are all on the same side of the penalty area. There's not a single one the other side of the penalty spot. It's a mess, really. And even when the ball hits the back of the net, you see De Ligt turn and hold his arms out, but that's a structural issue. It's surely about communication, and whether it's just about new faces. It's a bit of a concern that those things are happening at this stage of the season.
I thought it was a really bad advertisement for the 5 subs rule, which I've never been a fan of, and I don't agree with it. But United's front four was completely different at the end of the game from the start of the game. Of course, De Ligt came on for Maguire, which didn't seem to be an enforced change. So structurally, you think, where are the issues there? There are big issues there in terms of the lack of organisation. Some of those players, in the case of Xerxes, he's only just joined the club. De Ligt has only just joined the club. Anthony didn't even play that much during pre-season, and when he has played for United, he's hardly ever performed. And in terms of having that stability, you look at certain teams who have got it nailed down, and you know which players they're going to turn to, whatever the weather. And there's a kind of, it's almost if they're prepared for it. I remember Mourinho saying years ago that when they had a second leg against Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League, and they were 3-1 down from the first leg, and they trained during the week in the event that they would need a late goal. And in the end, they that's what happened. I think they were 1-0 up late on, and it might have been Demba Ba who made it 2-0 on the night, and Chelsea went through on the away goals rule. And so there's some kind of, even though it's a substitution, it's prepared and the players are prepared for it. Those changes at the weekend, I highly doubt a lot of the players would have been prepared for Bruno Fernandes coming off or Harry Maguire coming off. And I know, and you know, that if we ask Ten Hag that question on Thursday, he will say, we're managing their load. Maguire is coming back from injury. Fernandes plays all these games. Fine. But why are you keeping Kobbie Mainoo on, who has come back in, has started all 3 games this month? He played the full game against Brighton at the weekend when really he should have come off. I thought he just wasn't having any influence and he looked weird, and it's understandable. He's had a phenomenal 9 months. It's been a taxing period as well, and he had a very, mentally and physically sapping European Championship with England, playing in starting in 3 or 4 really high profile games. So there are inconsistencies there if it is a case of managing the load. And I thought the breakdown on Match of the Day was pretty good in terms of analysing those goals, and some of it is a bit luckless. I mean, they say Maguire's got to cover that route there, but he's drawn to the man who pulls off. It's good movement. I thought Martinez, for that phase of play, certainly was maybe a little bit more culpable because Welbeck stood right in front of him, and he's got to go for him. He's the big goal threat there. And his instincts just don't kick in. And you're right with what you said about the ease with which the cross came in. But the shape of their back four at that point, it just wasn't compact. And one of the best things about United in the FA Cup final in May was their shape with the ball and out of the ball, but particularly out of possession. They were so compact, it felt like they were tethered. And too often at the weekend, that wasn't the case. And this is against a very good Brighton side who I think will have a much better season than they did last season. They've been very aggressive with their recruitment, but they only started one of their summer signings. And yet, I think you said to me just before the game, like, how do you see this going? And I said, I don't think United will win here. I thought it was a mistake to play an unchanged team. I'm sure we'll get into elements of that soon. But you look at that performance at the weekend, and as I said, there are good aspects from it. But when you're still repeating the mistakes of last season by conceding an added time goal, and that's the feeling you get with United now. When you watch them, yesteryear they would be the ones who'd get the late goal, and it's been reversed now because it's happened so often, and that's a problem with game management. And I know that there were certain games last season where, I mean, the most infamous was one they actually ended up winning in the end, ultimately against Coventry in the FA Cup semi-final. On that day, from what I was told, Ten Hag pretty much absolved himself of blame for how they collapsed, because he thought that you're 3-0 up against a Championship side. If your players playing for Man United, you should be able to see that game out. And I do see where he's coming from in that sense, but it wasn't an aberration that day. When Coventry got certainly when Coventry made it 3-2, I think it almost felt inevitable that they were going to make it 3-3, because that's how vulnerable United are in the final 10 or 15 minutes of games. This is a team that scored seemingly a 96th minute winner at Brentford, but then conceded an equaliser in the 99th minute. They were 3-2 up in the 93rd minute against Chelsea, and they lost 4-3. These are not aberrations. They're happening very, very frequently. And that does come back to the manager. No two ways about it. Game management is part of what the manager dictates, and unfortunately for Ten Hag, he had a negative bearing on how they managed that game on Saturday.
Mm. And I mean, I think there have been improvements across these 2 games as well. I think one of the most noticeable for me has been the quality and the structure and the setup of United's pressing, which is maybe helped by the players they're playing at the moment. I wonder if one of the coaches, Brenny Hacker in particular, maybe has helped with that, because they seem a much better pressing side, and they won the ball high off Brighton a couple of times in the first half especially. And I mean, Mason Mount is a key weapon with that, and we talked about Mount last week. He had a much better game with the ball as well this week before going off injured at half time. And for me, it's been noticeable, I think, like these 2 games, that United's maybe shakier spell in both of them has come just off after Mount has gone off. We've, you mentioned there at the start of the second half how Brighton suddenly dominated to an extent they haven't done at all in the first half. Thinking back to the Fulham game when Mount went off for Xerxes, I think that led to Fulham's best spell. They had a 10 to 15 minute spell where suddenly there was space in midfield and they exploited it without scoring or creating a really good chance. But they had some very promising moments. And it's a difficult one with Mount because I think it's hard to see how he is going to fit in this team long term. But it also feels at the start of this season like he is delivering something to the general performance, isn't he?
His half at Brighton was his best for United and most meaningful. I mean, I think that people with long memories like us two would say, technically, I suppose his best half was against Crystal Palace in the League Cup last season, but it was Crystal Palace in the League Cup, and Palace had no interest in being at Old Trafford that night or being in that competition. He was very slick on the ball. He's almost, if you want to talk about pressing triggers or something like that, he's someone who completely gets that. I think it was Van Hecker who he had penned inside his own in the Brighton third, and he won the throw there, and he's ushering teammates forward, and that feels like we don't know specifically what this game model is that Ten Hag keeps on going about, and that's the new buzz phrase at United. But you feel like Mount actually fits into it with the way they're approaching games now, and his work off the ball, and how aggressive he is. And nobody has ever doubted his work ethic. There have been times where you've doubted what he actually does on the ball, but that wasn't the case at the weekend. He did look like a playmaker. He didn't look like someone who was burdened by the number 7. He looked like he felt as though he belonged in the number 7, wearing the number 7 shirt for Manchester United. The issue that he had was that he would obviously usher teammates to back him up and to keep get United up the pitch. But their midfield dynamic at the moment doesn't really have that. Mainu is more of a conductor than a destructor. Casemiro is on his last legs, and we all thought that the FA Cup final might have been his last dance. He was even dropped for that game, but United are still saddled with him because even the Saudi Arabian club don't want him. It will be fascinating to see how Ugarte fits in, because you could see Ugarte and Mount really complementing each other well, because they're two aggressive players and two very intense players off the ball, and they can do a fair bit on it as well. So, but that of course throws up the issue of what do you do with Fernandes, because he's still by far and away the most influential player in that squad. I think if we were to briefly look ahead to Liverpool on Sunday, if Mount's fit for that game, he has to start. And I would probably go with, you're probably looking at Fernandes and thinking in as a false 9 still, or you put him on the right. And it's Ahmad who drops out just because it's Liverpool. If you want a bit of if you want a bit of tactical flexibility, but I would certainly be saying that Mount should start that game behind whoever the striker is. So some progress for him, but unfortunately for him, it was curtailed by that issue he felt at halftime, and they brought him off. And I think it was pretty obvious when Xerxes came on, and all of us were pretty shocked that Mount was the one who'd made way, that it had to be enforced because he was United's best player in the first half.
Yeah, totally. Before we get on to team selection, we'll maybe look at that in the second half when we consider what changes you might make for Liverpool. We'll obviously do a bigger Liverpool preview later in the week as well. But I mean, looking at positives from the weekend, then a goal for Ahmad. I mean, he missed a very good chance in the first half where he probably went with his foot, maybe should have gone with his head, but took his goal really clinically, a really direct run for it. Obviously, it'd been a difficult 24, 48 hours for him as well. He was one of the positives. Garnacho again off the bench and should have made an impact. I guess he did make an impact, but for Joshua Xerxes' misplaced knee. And they did look better going forward in the final quarter of the game, I guess. They kind of weathered that storm at the start of the second half and then suddenly seemed to find a way to get in behind Brighton pretty regularly.
Well, that was encouraging. After they made it 1-1, they had the momentum, and it was an obvious change to make. I mean, when Garnacho came back from his warm-up, just as he was taking his seat, that's when Ahmad scored. and you wondered whether Ten Hag would delay Garnacho coming on. He didn't. He came on about 3 or 4 minutes later, and it was the right man to take off as well, because Rashford, unfortunately for United, unfortunately for him, he looks entirely drained of confidence, and he's getting worse. His performance level has got worse this month. I think you could have, those chances he missed in the Community Shield, as I said a couple of weeks ago, you could discount them because it's the Community Shield. He's getting the chances. You have some confidence that the goal will come. What couldn't be discounted was him going through one-on-one with Bernd Leno and deciding to pass it up and then playing the pass behind Garnacho. And at the weekend, apparently he was offside twice. It felt like a lot more than that. And there were times when he was offside. I think for the disallowed goal, he's offside, well offside, when that first cross is coming in that gets blocked. Then the cross finally does come to him, and he's well offside as well. Match the Day picked up that chance, that opportunity where he gets the ball on the byline, and rather than continuing down the left flank, he cuts inside. I think towards the end, right at the end of the half, he attempted one of those cross-field punts that, for him, never seemed to come off, but it did come off in the FA Cup final, that brilliant second goal. And it was blocked. He lost it, and he just looked at the heavens, and all he saw was raindrops falling on his head. And it felt like a metaphor for his form at the moment. It doesn't rain, but it pours. He could easily have come off at half time. And you knew when Garnacho, certainly after Ahmad had scored, and with Garnacho clearly getting ready to come on, that it had to be Rashford to come off. And Garnacho, the use of him, I just don't agree with this month. He was indispensable for United last season. For me, he was their player of the season last season. He didn't have a lot of playing time during the Copa America. He came back before Kobbie Mainoo as well to Carrington for training. And I know there are different issues in terms of the other wingers, the four of them. They've all had a full pre-season. United's midfield is not in a good enough state. It's very much dependent on Mainoo. But Garnacho should have started against Fulham. He should have started against Brighton. He scored one goal. He's created another goal. He should have had a goal at the weekend, but for Xerxes. And they have got dynamism with Garnacho and Ahmad. And there has, I think it was myself and Steven last week, we touched upon Garnacho's best position, whether it's on the right or the left. And his goal scoring record is pretty similar from both sides. And I think it's a testament to his mentality and his ability that he plays well on both sides. You've got some right-footed wingers who don't want to play on the right wing as if it's an alien concept to them, even though right-footed footballers have played very well from the right side for decades, probably more than 100 years. And that's what sets Garnacho apart from the other wingers at United. Ten Hag said after the game, he said, we pick our best team. Well, he didn't pick his best team at the weekend because Garnacho is his best winger and he's in the best United team. And you'd say at the moment, Ahmad certainly is as well, because he offers that directness, that dynamism. And I think his shot was probably going in even, but for the deflection. It was just very, very good wing play. And there's a buzz when he gets the ball. He did very well for that goal that should have been as well, with the timing of his pass for Fernandes. I think a lot of wingers at that age with a similar level or lack of first team experience, they might have botched that, but he is polishing his play, and he's certainly a better option on the right than Antony. And there'll be certain games where Ten Hag will, I imagine, accommodate Mount and Fernandes, with Fernandes on the right, possibly in Mount in the middle, and that might happen this weekend. But Ahmad's trajectory this calendar year has been very good, and this is a player who, let's face it, he only started his first meaningful game for United in May. So the progress he's making is a definite plus.
Yeah, undoubtedly. That's all for part one of the Manchester Red podcast. We'll be back after the break to look ahead to Liverpool and discuss a few transfer bits. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. We finished that first half talking about Garnacho. Then let's just kind of delve into it a little bit again. We were talking on Saturday morning, talking about the the press conference, and I was saying to you, I found it interesting how his answers in the embargoed section for Sunday's papers on Garnacho and Mainu differed really. When I mean, I asked him about Garnacho and basically suggested what's he got to do to become the world class player that I think certainly most United fans would feel he can be, and it felt like Ten Hag, really played it down. It was you go very quickly, world class player. It was, he was basically saying he's got a lot of work to do. He needs to work hard to get there. And then we came on to Mainu, and it was, he can defend, he can attack. He's the perfect midfielder. Is one who is very good in attacking, very good in defending. He is a player can do that, and it was kind of, the one young player you're really singing the praises of. The other you're saying you've got a lot of work to do. You've got to keep working hard, and it felt like, and there's always a chance of reading too much into it, but I would say they're on a pretty similar level in terms of talent and where they can get to, Garnacho and Mainu. And it felt like he was kind of delivering very different messages to them. And I think we were both surprised that Garnacho's now been on the bench 3 games in a row, and surely he's got to come in. But you wonder if there's maybe some kind of message from Ten Hag there. But it is a strange one, given that he came back early for pre-season.
I mean, I watched that clip, and I read your write-up as well. And I half wonder, because sometimes, I mean, Ten Hag can be a bit of a clunky communicator. And I half wonder whether he just thought Garnacho is world class. And I don't think any of us have said he's world class, because frankly, he isn't. He's still got a way to reach that level. But I think we all have a lot of confidence in him attaining that level because of the skill set and because of his age. And you look at his progression season after season, he's well on track for that. He, at his age, I think he's far more important for United than Cristiano Ronaldo was at 20. I don't think there's even a debate about it. There was probably at some point last season, but the sheer number of games he started in succession last season, which was 38, and to get the goal in the FA Cup final, to play such an instrumental role in that FA Cup final victory, he is not a youngster who's had the benefit that someone like Ronaldo or Wayne Rooney had when they entered a dressing room teeming with serial winners, players who'd been there several years, who knew the ins and outs of the club, knew what the demands were, and could show them the ropes. He's not had that benefit. That there are some good leaders at United, but it's nothing. It's incomparable with Ferguson's heyday, and that's why for me, Garnacho was United's Player of the Year last season, because he was carrying the team so often whilst playing as regularly as he was, and summoning up moments of genius like the overhead kick at Everton, his performance against Liverpool, which was not one of his best performances, but he was involved in all 4 of those goals in the FA Cup quarter final. His brother said he'd been carrying a hamstring injury in the week. As I said, his mentality and his ability are exceptional, and you hope that he continues in this vein and stays on the straight and narrow. He's not straight and narrow, I should say. He's not really had any major setbacks yet, and those harsh bumps in the road are still probably going to come. But as I said earlier, United, he is United's best winger. He is in their best team, but he's not been in their starting team this month. And I know Ten Hag has got a strategy there, and he again referred to the finishers, i.e. the substitutes, at the weekend, because United do have better squad depth now. It feels like they have got pretty good options to turn to on the bench. If you need someone to get you out of a hole, and you look behind you and you see Garnacho there, that's pretty good going. But he's not a substitute. He's a starter. He started 38 games on the spin last season, and he actually started. He started the first 2 games of last season when he wasn't convincing, and then he did get dropped after the Tottenham defeat, and that was the right call at the time. But he was still quite a callow player then, and he was still having to learn his trade, and he is still doing that. But I don't think he's got I don't think it's a long way for him to go. I think that there's every chance that this season could be the season that he really truly takes off. As I said, he's already got 1 goal. He should have had another goal at the weekend, but for Xerxes, and he created the winning goal against Fulham. I mean, he's borderline talismanic for United, and that's this month, and that's despite him being a substitute. There's every chance when it comes to United's Player of the Month poll that it is won by someone who's started the majority of their games as a substitute this month, because he has been their best player so far this month.
Yeah, like see, I mean, you can't really argue with coming off the bench and kind of scoring twice and creating a goal. I guess he is making an impact and deserves to start. That start would be against Liverpool on Sunday. A big week for United, a big week for Ten Hag ahead of Liverpool, and the obvious comparisons with Arne Slot. And we'll wait to see how the United squad looks on Sunday. It looks like Scott McTominay won't be in it heading to Napoli. Manuel Ugarte could be. The news this morning that there's United and PSG have finally agreed a deal for Ugarte, 50 million euros with 10 million euros in add-ons. PSG wanted 60 fixed fee. So long negotiations to reach a point where both are happy with, but United pretty pleased with the deal they've got. And this, it's been clear since the start of the summer, really, that this is the holding midfielder they have wanted. This is the one they've prioritised. There's been mention of Zubamende, Amrabat, but it's been Ugarte as the number one target for a long time. So it's a promising sign that the deal is done.
Yeah, and I think some of those names were mentioned just to save face, really. I think Ugarte was clearly the one they always wanted. I was told I was at the other Old Trafford at the cricket on Thursday that the formalities were done. And obviously we did that joint byline job of the story. And then someone at United told us on Saturday that it was a deal that was in the balance, which I think we've now discovered is effectively code for it's all but done. I mean, they can be some can be extremely cautious because they don't want to tempt fate or what have you. But that deal has been moving in the right direction for quite some time. You wrote, I think it was on the eve of the Fulham game, that there was confidence from United that they would get it done. That other players who they were maybe looking at or linked with, again, it was just kind of like they were either fallback options or they were just names to throw out there just to almost just placate supporters, really. I mean, Amrabat has been mentioned, and there'd have been something very wrong if they'd ended this transfer window signing Sofian Amrabat, who's a player they had an option to buy in the summer and who they've shown no concrete desire to actually sign this summer. And he's still at Fiorentina. He may not be at Fiorentina this time next week, and he may get that move given his contract situation. But it would have been remiss of United to have just signed someone who's familiar to Ten Hag, even though they have done that with this summer with Matthijs de Ligt and Nusa Masraoui. But Ugarte is a player that they need. They need a younger and more dynamic number 6 in midfield, because they can't get by with Casemiro for half a season, never mind a whole season. He is a player who's in decline. He's actually a better attacking midfielder than a defensive midfielder these days, it seems. And it's for the best of the balance of the squad and the team that Ugarte comes in and McTominay goes. What I'd say about McTominay is that the profitability and sustainability rules do need to be amended to de-incentivize selling academy graduates. I think that is that's a major con with it, and it's something that Chelsea have exploited, and it's led to them treating some players who've come through their system really, really quite shabbily. Trevor Chalobah is the latest. Conor Gallagher is the best or worst example of that. But with McTominay, he only started 16 games in Ten Hag's first season, and I felt it was odd that United rejected 30 million from West Ham for him last year, because I thought that was reflective of his value at the time and a pretty good fee they were getting for someone who Ten Hag had pretty much rumbled, but in the end he only stayed because Kobbie Mainoo got injured, and United thought he was worth 40 million, which I thought was fanciful to say the least. It's to McTominay's immense credit that he then had the season that he had, scoring 10 goals, all of them really big goals as well, however way you look at it. But if United had to follow this game model, whatever that is, but I think we have an idea of what it is, and if they're to back the manager, you've got to, and you've got PSR to consider, then it is the right decision. The risk of it is that this is a team that does not score goals. at times, or struggles to score goals. Their top scorer last season had 16 or 17 goals, and McTominay, of course, got 10 goals last season. So there is a risk there, but he's just ultimately he's not aligned with what Ten Hag's perfect vision of United. It doesn't include McTominay in it. McTominay has about 3 or 4 functions when he goes on a football pitch. It's tackle, head ball, kick ball, score goal. That is what he does. And off the ball, he's an extremely hardworking athlete. He's a very robust athlete as well. And he's had an excellent career at United, given that I don't think anybody watching him at youth level would have given him a prayer. But Jose Mourinho saw something in him that nobody else did. And here he is, McTominay, 7 years later, having been in the embedded in the United first team for all of those 7 years, having done very well. But the fee is not reflective of his value now, but that's the position United are in because of his contract situation and the need to get funds in to be able to justify spending 40 odd million pounds on up front on Manuel Ugarte. I think is it 42.8 million the fee is?
42.3
up front. 42.3, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, like say, yeah. I mean, McTominay is certainly a player who has made the most of his talent at United, hasn't he? And the chances he was given, and I think everyone would agree with that. The PSR rules, I totally agree that it does make incentivise him selling academy players, and he just wasn't. He probably wasn't going to get the minutes he got last season. Really, if you think that, I mean, Mason Mount, now he's fully fit. If he stays fully fit this season, could effectively take his place in the squad. The challenge is, do you see Mount getting 10 goals? I'm not sure I do. It's more goals you need to replace, and we have, we've spoken about that a couple of times already this season. That the one question you have is where will the goals come from? The other interesting thing from the squad on Saturday was Jadon Sancho not in the 20 again. This time, no illness to hide behind, just simply not selected. Juventus interested in the final week of the window. I mean, it has got to be for the best interests of everyone that this gets done, hasn't it? It is you get the impression it is a very uneasy truce between Ten Hag and Sancho, and the fact that he's not even the matchday squad, I think, shows his status here, that he is just not going to get a lot of action this season if he stays, is he?
No, it's quite funny that he actually travelled with them to Brighton, almost as if like Ten Hag could check that he wasn't compiling some statement questioning why he was left out of the squad again, or on the off chance Ten Hag complained about his training form. I mean, Sancho deserves credit. He's been left out of 2 squads, and there's been no mention of his training form, and he's not put a statement out on Twitter so far. So he's made good progress from last year, but he needs to go this week. I mean, it was pretty obvious even after he came back into the squad that it was an uneasy alliance. United have not once been able to clarify. Ten Hag has not once decided to clarify whether Sancho apologised to him. I think we can safely assume that he didn't apologise. They just kind of had it out, and in a robust but possibly respectful way. And they've decided, to certainly for the interim, just let bygones be bygones, grin and bear it. Ten Hag has started him in friendlies. He brought him on in the Community Shield, but when it's come to the games that mattered most, he's been very keen to clarify that Sancho could have been included in the squad against Fulham, but he wasn't, even though he had that ear infection. And of course, he wasn't included in the squad against Brighton. And I suspect whether he's at United or not, this weekend he won't be in the squad against Liverpool either. It's not as simple as saying who's better, Sancho or Anthony, because on their day, Jadon Sancho is a better footballer, but it doesn't work out that way. They can't sell Anthony. They're not going to sell Anthony, and it goes beyond your talent. And Sancho has not really showcased that talent very often for United, and his most memorable. I suppose the most memorable period for him at the club was when he wasn't playing, because he accused the manager of lying in a public post on Twitter. And I think he's very lucky to have actually played for United again, even though it was just a cameo in the Community Shield. But that really needs to be the end of it. It'll be interesting to see if they do sell him, what where he goes to. I mean, at the moment, it is still Juventus. That interest is firm. There's been some noise about Chelsea. I think that's possibly being driven by Sancho's camp. It would seem convenient for United to swap Sancho for Raheem Sterling, but I think there is an element of wishful thinking there. From a PSR perspective, that does not make sense for United either. I mean, those two players' valuation is probably identical. I don't think there'd exactly be an issue over clubs needing a fee there, but the salary of both players, there is a disparity there. Sterling, from what I understand, earns quite a bit more than Sancho. United are already doubled up on the right-hand side, even if it is imperfect, with Ahmad quite raw but promising, and then you've got Antony, who is not raw and certainly not promising either, unfortunately for them. But they have coping mechanisms there. Garnacho has started quite a few games on the right, and of course, I imagine he'll play there at times this season. And also regarding the injury issues last season, the attack was never really depleted. It was the problem was that they only had one striker all season, pretty much, because Anthony Marshall was just siphoning off the wage bill and getting massages on the treatment table at Carrington. But this season they have got two strikers. One is injured at the moment, but expected back next month, of course, in Rasmus Højlund. But by and large, last season they did have a decent pool of attackers to draw on. I mean, Fernandes only missed a couple of games, and that was towards the end of the season. Garnacho avoided injury in the entirety throughout last season. So they have got options there. It is imperfect. I mean, there are a lot of United fans who, again, speaking to them at the weekend, who really wish there was a market for Marcus Rashford out there. But the fact of the matter is, and was, that there hasn't been. That's why he's still at the club, and he also got a new contract last year. So that's also partly on United. But who's to say what could happen in a year's time? Maybe Rashford will, that form of 22, 23, he'll start to showcase that, and United fans will be delighted to have him. But they weren't going, as Jim Ratcliffe said, they weren't going to get all their issues resolved in one summer transfer window. But I think they've sold the right players. You look at all the players they've sold, there's not a single one who I'd have said, no, they've made a mistake. They've made a mistake letting him go. And a friend highlighted at the weekend that it's almost as if some United fans have become normalised to the club being mediocre and being saddled with mediocre players who aren't ever actually going to make them a force again. And they're almost, they almost feel regretful about them leaving when they do. But Wan-Bissaka should have been sold. He came to the end of his time at United. It was a natural decision to make there. I don't think he outstayed his welcome necessarily, but because of because of his profile, because of his contract situation and what they wanted from that role, it was logical to sell him, as it is logical to sell McTominay, albeit the PSR rules are illogical for selling academy players and incentivising that.
Yeah, so I think it's, with a few days to go, it's looking like it's going to be a pretty good window for United. We are into the final days of it now. The deadline on Friday, so stay tuned to the MEN for any updates and any Raheem Sterling shaped surprises coming in at Old Trafford. We'll be back later in the week to try and round up the window. Obviously, it doesn't close until late on Friday, but I'm sure we'll know by then how things are looking for United. But that is all today. Thank you for your time, Samuel.
Thank you, Tyrone. Appreciate it.
Not a problem at all. Like I say, stay tuned with us for the rest of the week to keep abreast of any transfer developments. Remember to like, subscribe. You'll get us in your podcast feed when we do reappear later in the week. But thank you for listening today, and speak to you all soon.